I spent 8 years building a billion-dollar tech empire from a garage, only to be kicked out on my 10th anniversary. But when my husband used my old credit card to buy his mistress a diamond, he made a fatal mistake. That petty theft triggered the master control I buried deep in the system. Now, while he celebrates his public offering, I am holding the digital match that will burn his entire world to ash. My name is Elena Vance, and I stood alone in the corner of the grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, clutching a glass of lukewarm water. It was the 10th anniversary gala of Orasys, the tech giant that the world currently hailed as the dawn of a new digital age. The room smelled of expensive perfume and old money. Men in Italian tuxedos and women in haute couture gowns swirled around the center floor, laughing and clinking crystal flutes. I felt like an imposter in my own life. Technically, I was the co-founder. I was the architect who spent 8 years destroying my eyesight and my posture to write the source code that now powered everything from logistics networks to hospital databases. But here, amidst the caviar and the camera flashes, I was invisible to them. I was just the quiet, dowdy wife of the charismatic CEO. A sharp vibration from the clutch in my hand broke my trance. I pulled out my phone, expecting a generic weather alert or a spam email. Instead, a fraud warning from my bank filled the screen. It was a notification for a transaction of $55,000 at Cartier. My stomach dropped. That credit card was linked to a savings account I had not touched in a decade, an account containing the inheritance my grandmother left me. I looked up, confused, searching the room for my husband. I found Adrian near the champagne tower. He looked magnificent, radiating the kind of confidence that only power and wealth can buy. But he was not alone. He was standing intimately close to Isabel, our new marketing director and the 25-year-old daughter of our fiercest competitor. Isabel threw her head back and laughed at something he said, her neck exposed. Then, I saw it. Adrian reached into his pocket and produced a velvet box. With a tender smile that I had not seen directed at me in years, he fastened a diamond necklace around her throat. The stones caught the light, glittering with a violence that made me nauseous. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The $55,000, the notification, the necklace. He had not just betrayed our marriage vows, he had stolen the only money I had left in the world to adorn his mistress. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. I started walking toward them, my vision blurring with red-hot anger. I needed to scream. I needed to tear that necklace off her skin. But before I could take 10 steps, a manicured hand clamped onto my arm like a vice. I turned to see Victoria Sterling, my mother-in-law, blocking my path. She scanned my appearance with open disgust. "Where do you think you are going?" "Elena," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Look at you. That dress is 3 seasons old. You look like the help. Do not dare embarrass my son tonight." Before I could retort, Adrian was there. He had spotted the commotion. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed. He gripped my elbow hard, his fingers digging into my flesh, and dragged me away from the crowd into a small, private coat check room near the service exit. The heavy door clicked shut, muffling the sound of the orchestra. He released me with a shove. I held up my phone, my voice trembling. "You used my card." "Adrian," I gasped, fighting for air. "You stole my grandmother's money to buy that woman a gift." Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, his expression bored. "My cards were maxed out preparing for the public offering. I knew you had that dormant account sitting there doing nothing. Consider it a severance package. Or a refund for the years I wasted dragging you along." "Severance," I whispered, tears spilling over. "We are married. I built this company. I spent 8 years. 8 years writing the algorithms while you slept. I am the reason you are standing here." Adrian laughed, a dry, cruel sound that echoed in the small room. "You are a code monkey." "Elena," he said coldly, "a glorified typist. That is all you ever were. Your code is legacy garbage now. Isabel. She is the future. She brings connections, capital, and an image that fits a $5 billion brand. You just bring depression and bad fashion. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. He tossed it at me. It hit my chest and fluttered to the floor. Sign the divorce papers. The lawyers drafted them this morning, he said, checking his watch. Now get out. Leave through the back door. If you make a scene out there, I will ruin you. He turned and walked out without a backward glance, ready to smile for the cameras, leaving me standing in the semi-darkness with nothing but a broken heart and a stolen credit card. The morning sun felt like a mockery as I stood before the glass doors of Orisis. I tapped my security badge against the scanner. A harsh buzzer sounded. The light flashed red. I tried again, pressing the plastic harder against the reader, but the result was the same. Access denied. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I had practically lived in this building for 8 years. I knew the hum of the servers better than the sound of my own voice. The security guard, a man named Miller whom I had bought coffee for every Christmas for 5 years, stepped forward. He refused to meet my eyes. He held out a pathetic, half-empty cardboard box. I am sorry, ma'am. Strictly following orders, Miller mumbled, looking at his shoes. Mr. Sterling said you are not permitted entry. This is everything from your desk. I looked into the box. It contained a cheap plastic stapler, a chipped mug, and a single pack of sticky notes, my notebooks, my hard drives, and the framed photo of the first team. Everything of value was gone. Behind Miller, employees I had hired and trained were walking through the turnstiles. Some looked down at their phones, pretending not to see me. Others offered quick, pitying glances before hurrying away as if misfortune were contagious. Before I could protest, the elevator doors dinged. Victoria Sterling stepped out into the lobby. She did not look like a mother-in-law. She looked like an executioner in a Chanel suit. She stopped 3 feet away from me, ensuring our personal space did not overlap. The penthouse is legally a corporate asset, she announced loud enough for the receptionists to hear. Since you are no longer an employee or a spouse of the CEO, you have 24 hours to vacate. If you are not out by noon tomorrow, I will have the police remove you for trespassing. 24 hours, I choked out, my voice cracking. But that is my home. Where am I supposed to go? That is hardly my concern, Victoria replied, checking her watch. You should have thought about that before you became a liability. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I logged into our joint bank account. I needed to book a hotel. I needed to move money. But the screen flashed an error message, account frozen. I tried the secondary account. 0 balance. I frantically tapped through the transaction history. Over the last 6 months, Adrian had systematically transferred every cent to offshore trusts in the Cayman Islands. He had been planning this while sharing my bed. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I opened the corporate registry app. I needed to prove I was a founder. I needed to prove I owned 50% of this company. I scrolled to the founding documents. My breath hitched. My name was gone. In the amended filings from 2 years ago, the list of founders read only Adrian Sterling. He had erased me. He had forged my digital signature on removal waivers that I never saw. A notification pinged at the top of my screen. It was a post from Isabel. It was a selfie of her sitting in my office chair, holding my coffee mug. The caption read, "Finally taking out the trash. Time for a real queen to lead. New era by Gold Digger." The humiliation burned my skin. I dialed the number of Sarah, a venture capitalist I had known since college. She had been my bridesmaid. Elena Sarah's voice was tight. "Sarah, please. I need help," I pleaded, clutching the phone with both hands. Adrian locked me out. He stole everything. I just need a place to stay for 2 days until I can't get involved. Elena, Sarah interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper. Adrian threatened to pull Oris's funding from anyone who helps you. I have a firm to run. I am sorry. Truly. The line went dead. I called Mark, then David, then 3 others. Rejection after rejection. They were terrified. The Sterling family did not just fire people, they destroyed them. I turned away from the glass doors as the sky opened up. A torrential downpour crashed onto the pavement, washing away the dust of the city. I stepped out into the rain without an umbrella. The water soaked through my clothes instantly, chilling me to the bone. I stood on the curb, shivering, with no home, no money, and no friends. I reached into my pocket and my fingers brushed against the cold plastic of the credit card Adrian had used to buy Isabel her necklace. It was the only thing I had left, a stolen card for a stolen life. I gripped it until the edges bit into my palm, the physical pain the only thing keeping me from screaming. The smell of damp mold was something that never quite washed off my skin anymore. I was living in a basement studio in a crumbling building on the outskirts of New Jersey, a place where the sunlight struggled to reach the windows. The floorboards were warped, and at night, I could hear the scratching of rats inside the walls. When I turned on the single flickering bulb in the bathroom, cockroaches would scatter into the cracks, reclaiming the darkness. It was a far cry from the penthouse overlooking Central Park, but for $600 a month, it was the only shelter I could afford without a credit history. To survive. I had taken a job as a night shift data entry clerk at a logistics warehouse 3 miles away. The irony was suffocating. I was the woman who wrote the foundational code for the most advanced artificial intelligence in the country. Yet here I was, sitting on a broken plastic chair, manually typing shipping manifest numbers into a legacy system for $11 an hour. My fingers, which once danced across keyboards creating worlds, were now calloused and stained with cheap ink. During the quiet hours of the shift, when the hum of the conveyor belts lulled the warehouse to sleep, I would stare at the gray screen and remember. I remembered the garage where Adrian and I started. I remembered the smell of soldering iron and stale pizza. I remembered how he would hold the flashlight for me when the power went out, whispering that we would change the world. We were partners then. We were a team. On my break, I walked into the kitchenette and saw the news playing on a mounted television. The headline made my knees weak. Orasis to IPO at $5 billion valuation. The screen cut to a live feed of Adrian and Isabel. They were holding hands, waving to a cheering crowd. The caption read, "The Golden Couple of Silicon Valley." Isabel looked radiant in a dress that probably cost more than my entire yearly salary at the warehouse. Adrian looked like a king. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, a mixture of physical hunger and spiritual evisceration. I had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days, surviving on tap water and stale crackers, but the sight of them feasting on my life's work hurt more than the empty twisting of my stomach. They had not just stolen my money, they had stolen my legacy. When I returned to my apartment the next morning, my landlady, Mrs. Kovach, was waiting at my door. She was a hard woman with eyes like flint. "You are late again." "Elena," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "I told you last week. No money. No room. I have people lining up for this place. Please, Mrs. Kovach." "I get paid on Friday." I begged, my voice raspy from exhaustion. "I just need a few more days. Friday is too late." She spat, stepping closer. "Pay me today or put your things on the street. I am not running a charity." She left me standing there, shaking. I went inside and looked at the only thing of value I had left. It was my custom-built laptop, a high-performance machine I had used to write the final patch for Orasis. It was my baby. It was the last piece of the old Elena. I closed my eyes, tears leaking out, and put it in my bag. I walked to the pawn shop down the street. The man behind the counter gave me $300 for a machine worth $4,000. I took the cash without a word, feeling like I had just sold a limb. I returned to the room, clutching the cash, hoping to buy another month of misery. But there was an envelope taped to my door. It was not from the landlady. It was a thick, legal envelope. I tore it open with trembling hands. It was a court summons. Adrian Sterling was suing me for misappropriation of trade secrets and breach of non-disclosure agreements. The lawsuit claimed I was a security risk. It was a strategic move designed to blacklist me, ensuring no reputable tech company would ever hire me again. He was not satisfied with leaving me homeless. He wanted to ensure I starved. I slid down the wall, the papers scattering across the dirty floor. I pulled my knees to my chest and buried my face in my hands. Victoria was right. I was useless. I was a discarded tool. The cold seeped into my bones, and for the first time in my life, I did not want to fight. I just wanted to close my eyes and let the darkness take me. The phone buzzed against the dusty floorboards, vibrating with a persistence that annoyed me. I was lying on my back, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked like a weeping eye. It was a number I did not recognize. I considered letting it ring out, but a small, masochistic part of me wanted to know what fresh hell awaited. I swiped to answer, Ms. Vance. This is the fraud department at Chase, a robotic female voice intoned. We are calling about a significant overdraft on your platinum card. The balance is currently $55,000 over the limit due to interest charges and recent activity. We need to discuss a payment plan immediately. I let out a dry, bitter laugh. I have $12 to my name. You can take the card, you can take the debt. Just close the account. I do not care anymore. I can certainly initiate the closure process. The agent replied, the clicking of a keyboard audible in the background. However, I must inform you that closing this account will automatically terminate all recurring subscriptions linked to it. Would you like to review them before I proceed? I do not have any subscriptions, I said, my voice flat. My husband used that card to buy jewelry for his mistress. Nothing on there belongs to me. I see several active monthly charges, she continued, ignoring my confession. There is a streaming service, a gym membership, and a web hosting fee for, let me see, Aura Core Genesis. The amount is $99 per month. My breath hitched in my throat. I sat up straight, the blood rushing from my head. The room suddenly felt very small. Read that last one again. Please, I whispered, pressing the phone tight against my ear. Aura Core Genesis, the agent repeated. It has been a recurring charge for exactly 8 years and 2 months. It is set to auto-renew tomorrow. My mind raced back to a rainy Tuesday 8 years ago. We were working out of the garage, and our seed funding had dried up. We needed to deploy the foundational code, the absolute core of the AI, onto a secure cloud server. The company account had been empty, so I pulled out my personal credit card. I signed up for the hosting service under my own name. I created the root access. Over the years, as Orasys grew into a billion-dollar empire, we hired accountants, CFOs, and entire finance departments. They migrated the front-end servers, the marketing domains, and the employee emails to corporate accounts. But the core, the deep backend that held the original genetic code of the software, it was a black box that just worked. It was so reliable, so buried beneath layers of new interface, that everyone forgot it existed on a separate billing cycle. Adrian and his team were so arrogant, so focused on the shiny new IPO, that they forgot to check the basement. Do not close the account, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. I repeat, do not close that account. I will find a way to pay the minimum. I hung up and scrambled to my feet. The jewelry purchase. When Adrian used the card at Cartier, he must have triggered a reactivation of the dormant security protocols linked to the billing profile. He thought he was just spending my money. He did not realize he was waking up a sleeping giant. I grabbed my coat and ran out of the apartment. I needed a computer, and I had sold mine. I sprinted 3 blocks to a grimy internet cafe that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and energy drinks. I slammed a $5 bill onto the counter. 1 hour, I demanded. I sat down at a greasy terminal and opened a private browser. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed in the IP address of the Genesis server. It was a string of numbers I had memorized like my own birthday. The login screen appeared. It was simple, stark text against a black background. No logos, no branding. Just the original gateway. I typed in my old username, Evance01, then the password. It was a complex string based on the street name where Adrian and I had our first kiss. A wave of nausea hit me, but I pushed through it. Enter. A spinning wheel appeared. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. I held my breath, terrified that they had changed it, that I was truly locked out. Then, the screen flashed green. Access granted. Welcome. Supreme Administrator. I stared at the monitor, my mouth slightly open. The interface loaded, displaying the file directory. There it was. The entire intellectual property of Orasys, the customer database, the proprietary algorithms, the keys to the kingdom. Because I had paid the bill, legally. This server belonged to me. Adrian had the company name. He had the building. He had the investors. But I had the brain. I navigated to the system controls. My cursor hovered over a command line labeled System Override. I was not just a user. I was the god of this machine. I had found the kill switch, and for the first time since the gala, I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the sharp, dangerous smile of a woman who had just realized she was holding a loaded gun. I did not pull the trigger immediately. Revenge, like complex software, requires clean architecture and perfect timing to avoid bugs. I spent 3 consecutive nights in that neon-lit internet cafe, fueled by cheap vending machine coffee and the cold clarity of hatred. I stopped being the weeping wife and returned to being the engineer. I dove into the back end of Orasys, peeling away the layers of the interface like dead skin. What I found was almost laughable. The revolutionary artificial intelligence platform that Adrian was about to pitch to Wall Street, the one valued at $5 billion, was a fraud. It was not a new engine. It was a clumsy patch job stitched over my original source code from 4 years ago. They had simply renamed the variables and built a flashy front-end dashboard to fool the investors. But the real bombshell was the infrastructure. Because Adrian had been too cheap to migrate the hosting plan I established in our garage days. The physical location of the data, the entire customer database, and the intellectual property rights resided on a server instance that was legally leased to me. I dug deeper, following the digital breadcrumbs left by the finance department. Since I had root access, I could see every hidden file and deleted log. I found a folder labeled Miscellaneous Operations. Inside, there were hundreds of invoices for phantom vendor services. Adrian had been siphoning company funds into shell corporations in Panama under the guise of purchasing hardware that never existed. Every transaction was timestamped and authorized by his personal digital key. He thought he had deleted these logs, but he had only removed the shortcuts on his desktop. The raw data remained in the system archive, which I controlled. I initiated a secure transfer. I copied every terabyte of data, every incriminating email, and every line of stolen code onto an encrypted cloud drive that only I could access. Then, I opened the command terminal to write my masterpiece. It was a simple script, a few lines of code designed to override the display output of the main presentation server. I set the timer. The script would execute exactly when the system clock hit the scheduled start time of the IPO presentation. With the digital trap set, I turned my attention to the physical world. I had 1 day left before the bank realized the fraud and locked the card. I had a credit limit of $100,000, and I intended to use every cent. I walked into a high-end boutique and purchased a tailored charcoal suit that screamed power, along with stilettos that could double as weapons. Then, I looked up the toughest intellectual property lawyer in New York. I met Robert inside a private booth at a quiet steakhouse, paying his $10,000 retainer up front with the card. He was a sharp man with graying temples who listened without blinking as I laid out the situation. When I showed him the server contract and the printouts of the embezzlement logs, his eyes widened. If these documents are authentic, Elena, you do not just have a case, Robert said, tapping the paper with his index finger. You have a Nuclear weapon. We can freeze their assets before the opening bell rings. No, I replied, my voice steady and cold. I do not want to stop the IPO. I want them to walk out onto that stage. I want them to feel the height of their success, right before the floor drops out. Robert smiled, a shark acknowledging another predator. That is incredibly vicious. I like it. I left the restaurant and checked into a hotel, finally showering off the grime of the warehouse. I looked at myself in the mirror. The exhausted, broken woman who had been thrown out into the rain was gone. I was no longer a discarded spouse. I was the founder. I was the architect. And tomorrow, I was going to collect my debt. I initiated the chaos with a single keystroke at 6 a.m. I sent an anonymous high-priority memo to the entire Orasys Board of Directors with the subject line Critical Security Vulnerability Root Admin Access Unverified. Within 10 minutes, my phone, which I had linked to the server logs, showed the result. The internal network traffic spiked. The tech team was panicking. They were trying to patch a hole they could not even see, let alone touch. They were frantically attempting to reset the root passwords, but every command returned the same mocking error: permission denied, contact system owner. 2 hours later, I walked through the revolving doors of the Orasys headquarters. This time, I was not shielding myself from the rain or carrying a cardboard box of junk. I was wearing the charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, and my heels clicked against the marble floor with the rhythm of a war drum. Beside me walked Robert, carrying a leather briefcase that contained the legal equivalent of a guillotine. We bypassed the reception desk and headed straight for the executive elevators. Before I could press the button, the doors slid open, revealing Victoria Sterling. She stopped dead, her eyes raking over my new appearance with confusion that quickly hardened into sneering hostility. "You have some nerve showing your face here." "Elena," she spat, blocking the elevator. "I told you that you had 24 hours to disappear." "Security, get this. Trash out of my lobby." 2 guards started to move toward us, hands on their belts. Robert stepped forward, calm and immovable. He held up a hand, palm out. "I would not do that if I were you," Robert said, his voice projecting across the silent lobby. "Ms. Vance is not here as a former employee. She is here as the primary vendor and owner of your critical infrastructure. Removing her would be a violation of the service level agreement and grounds for immediate termination of your server access." Victoria blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "What? What are you talking about? We own everything. Actually, you own the furniture and the logo," I said, stepping past her into the elevator. "I own the digital ground you built your castle on. Now, take us to Adrian." We rode up to the top floor in silence. When we entered the boardroom, Adrian and Isabel were huddled over a laptop with the chief technology officer. The air in the room was thick with tension. Adrian looked up, his face pale and unshaven. "What is she doing here?" Isabel shrieked, standing up. "This is a restricted meeting, Adrian." "Call the police." "Sit down." "Isabel," I said, my voice low and devoid of warmth. Robert opened his briefcase and slid a single document across the mahogany table. It was the original hosting contract, dated 8 years ago, with the highlighted clause regarding the ownership of the root directory and the Genesis server. Your entire backend, including the new AI platform you intend to launch, is hosted on a private server cluster leased to Elena Vance, Robert explained professionally. You have been using her property without authorization for commercial gain. We are here to collect. Adrian picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He read the lines, his eyes widening as the realization hit him. He looked at the CTO, who nodded grimly. "We can't bypass it, sir," the CTO whispered, terrified. "The root admin credentials are hers. If we try to force a migration now, we lose the data integrity. The IPO is tomorrow. We are stuck." Isabel slammed her hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. She is just a coder. She doesn't know anything about business. She is just a..." A leech trying to steal our money. I turned to Isabel, tilting my head slightly. Actually, Isabel, I said coolly, the issue is not business. It is the kernel-level load balancing on the Linux clusters. Your front-end API calls are routing through a deprecated gateway that only my account can update. If I do not authorize the handshake protocol in the next 12 hours, your $5 billion AI will suffer a catastrophic latency failure during the live demo. Do you even know what a handshake protocol is? Or do you just know how to pick out jewelry? Isabel opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. She looked at Adrian. Lost. What do you want? Adrian asked, his voice hoarse. Money. I offered you a settlement. I want my company back, I replied, leaning over the table. I want public recognition of my 50% stake in Orisys. I want my name back on the founders list. And I want a seat on the board. That is impossible, Adrian hissed, his face turning red. The investors will walk. You are. Nobody to them. Then the servers go dark, I said, standing up. You have until the market opens. Fix it. Or I will delete it. We turned to leave. You think you have won. Elena Adrian called out, his voice trembling with rage. I will have the best hackers in the world on this within the hour. We will break your little code. And then I will bury you. I paused at the door and looked back. Good luck. Adrian, you are going to need it. The digital siege began less than an hour after I left the Orisys building. I was sitting in a secure conference room at Robert's law firm, my eyes glued to a borrowed laptop, watching the server logs scroll by at a dizzying speed. Red warning lines flashed across the screen like tracer fire. Adrian had clearly hired a mercenary army of black hat hackers. They were hammering the firewall with a brute force attack, throwing millions of password combinations against the gate every second. They are aggressive, Robert noted, looking over my shoulder with a frown. Is the encryption holding for now? I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard. But they are not just trying to guess the password. They are looking for a backdoor in the kernel. If they find one, they take total control. I knew I could not hold the wall forever against a dedicated team of professionals. So I initiated the nuclear option. I typed in a command string that I had designed years ago for a worst-case scenario. It was a dead man's switch. I just linked the database integrity to my active session key. I explained to Robert, hitting the enter key with a decisive snap. If they breach the perimeter or try to bypass the login, the system detects the intrusion and instantly overwrites every sector of the hard drive with random noise. If they break in, they destroy the very thing they are trying to steal. While I fought the war in cyberspace, the Sterling family opened a front in the court of public opinion. On the television mounted in the corner of the room, a breaking news alert flashed. Victoria Sterling stood in front of a bank of microphones, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. It is truly heartbreaking, Victoria sobbed on camera, her performance worthy of an Academy Award. My son's ex-wife. She has had a mental break. She is demanding millions of dollars to release our company data. She is a dangerous woman who needs psychiatric help, not a platform. My phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Kovach, my landlady. Elena, she screamed into the phone, her voice panic-stricken. 3 men. They just kicked down your door. They are tearing the room apart. They said they are looking for drives. I am calling the police. Do not go near them, Mrs. Kovach, I said, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. I am safe. Just stay away. They had sent goons to my apartment to find the physical backups. They were getting desperate. A moment later, an unknown number flashed on my screen. I answered, putting it on speaker. You think you are safe. Hiding behind a lawyer. Isabel's voice dripped with venom. We know where your mother is buried, Elena. We know. Everything. You are going to disappear from this industry. I will make sure you never even get a job. Fixing toasters. Isabel, I cut her off. My voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Save your breath. You are going to need it for your apology tour. I hung up before she could respond. The pressure was immense. They were attacking my reputation, my home, and my safety. But every desperate move they made only confirmed that I had the upper hand. Their arrogance had turned into fear. Robert walked back into the room, holding a tablet. He looked grim but focused. I just got word from a contact inside their IT department. He said, "They are trying to migrate the data to a new server farm to bypass your lock. They are copying the front end, hoping to rebuild the back end from scratch." "They can't do it in time," I said, shaking my head. "The dependency mapping alone takes days." "Exactly," Robert nodded. "Their engineers estimate the migration will take minimum 48 hours to reach stability. The IPO launches in 24 hours. They are mathematically screwed." I looked at the clock on the wall. The seconds ticked by, each one bringing Adrian closer to his public execution. He had 24 hours to perform a miracle, and I was the only one who could grant it. But I was not in the mood for miracles. I was waiting for the fire. The vibration of my phone against the mahogany table broke the silence of the conference room. It was Adrian. I let it ring 4 times before answering, savoring the desperation implied by each second of delay. When I finally swiped the screen, his voice was unrecognizable. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sickly sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "Elena." "Darling," Adrian said, his voice trembling slightly. "Look, things have gotten out of hand. We are family. We built this together. Didn't we? I want to make things right." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch until he broke. "I am authorized to offer you a settlement," he continued, speaking faster now. $10 million. Cash. Wire transfer to any offshore account you choose. Tonight. All you have to do is give me the root password and sign a waiver. 10 million. Elena, think about it. You could go anywhere. You could start over. $10 million. It was a fortune to the woman who was currently counting pennies for instant noodles. It was life-changing money. But compared to the $5 billion valuation of the company I built, it was pennies. It was a bribe to make the problem go away. "I will be at the launch party tonight," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "So? You accept?" he asked, hope creeping into his voice. "You will bring the codes. I will see you there." "Adrian," I said, and hung up. I did not promise him the password. I did not promise him mercy. I only promised my presence. I spent the next hour transforming. I washed my face with cold water and applied the makeup I had bought, using sharp contouring to hide the gauntness of my cheeks and heavy concealer to mask the dark circles under my eyes. I slipped into the charcoal suit. It was tailored to perfection, sharp enough to cut glass. I pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun. Looking in the mirror, I did not see the homeless woman who had been evicted by her mother-in-law. I saw a shark. Before I left the safety of the law office, I opened the terminal on my phone one last time. I bypassed the standard admin controls and accessed the display drivers for the main presentation screen at the venue. I typed in a single line of code: identity ownership, public display mode. I set it to standby, linked to a manual trigger on my screen. I took a taxi to the venue. The launch was being held at the Gotham Hall, a venue that screamed excess. The paparazzi were swarming the entrance, blinding everyone with flashes. I stepped out of the car, my head held high. The security guards, who had likely been warned to watch for a crazy ex-wife, hesitated when they saw me. I looked like I owned the building. I walked past them before they could ask for an invitation. The main hall was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne. I spotted them immediately. Adrian was standing near the stage, sweating through his tuxedo, nervously checking his phone. Victoria stood beside him, holding court with a group of investors. When Victoria saw me, her eyes narrowed, but then a smirk curled her lips. She leaned over and whispered something to Adrian. He looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. His shoulders sagged in relief. They thought I was here to surrender. They thought the suit was just a costume for my capitulation, and that I was walking toward them to hand over the key in exchange for the check. Victoria raised her glass to me from across the room, a gesture of mocking triumph. She believed she had crushed me. She believed money could fix everything. I did not approach them. I stopped in the middle of the room, surrounded by the buzz of anticipation. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the screen. My thumb hovered over the execute button. I offered them a small, cold smile, the kind a predator gives before the bite, and waited for Adrian to take the stage. Adrian strode across the stage, bathed in a spotlight that cost more than my parents' house. He looked invincible. The audience, a mix of Wall Street sharks and Silicon Valley royalty, hung on his every word. He raised his arms, soaking in the applause, believing that my presence in the back of the room meant his victory was sealed. He thought I was here to take the check and sign away my life. He was wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian announced, his voice booming through the surround sound system. "Tonight, we do not just launch a product, we launch a revolution. The Aurasys AI is the first fully autonomous intelligence in history. Let me show you the future." He turned and gestured grandly toward the massive LED screen spanning the entire back wall of the stage. That was my cue. My thumb pressed down on the glass screen of my phone, executing the script I had written in the dark hours of the morning. The giant screen did not show the slick marketing video they had prepared. Instead, it flickered violently and went pitch black. The music cut out with a jarring screech. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. For 3 seconds, there was dead silence. Then, massive, blood-red letters typed themselves across the darkness, pixel by pixel, towering over Adrian's small figure. "Warning, copyright infringement, critical system lockdown, property of Elena Vance." Adrian froze. He tapped his earpiece, his composure shattering instantly. "Cut the feed," he hissed into his microphone, forgetting the audience could hear him. "Cut the power. Someone. Kill the screen." But nothing happened. The text remained, burning into the retinas of every investor in the room. I had locked the boot sequence at the kernel level. No one could turn it off unless they physically pulled the wires from the wall, and the server room was 3 floors down behind a biometric lock that only accepted my retina scan. I walked toward the stage. I did not run. I moved with the slow, terrifying inevitability of a rising tide. A sound technician, confused and panicked, left a handheld microphone on the stairs. I picked it up. "You cannot turn it off." "Adrian," I said, my voice amplified, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Because you do not own it." Adrian spun around, his eyes wild with panic. He looked like a trapped animal. "Security," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Get her. Get her off the stage. She is crazy. I am not crazy," I said calmly, stepping into the spotlight beside him. "I am the landlord, and you are 8 years behind on your rent." I tapped my phone screen again. The red text on the giant screen vanished, replaced by a high-resolution image of a bank statement. It was the credit card statement from the day of the gala. "This company claims to be worth $5 billion. I addressed the audience, pointing at the screen. Yet, the CEO had to steal his wife's dormant credit card to buy a $55,000 diamond necklace for his mistress, Miss Isabel Sterling. The crowd erupted. Phones snapped photos of the screen. I swiped again. The screen changed to display a complex web of wire transfers. "And here," I continued, my voice cold and precise, "are the logs of $3 million in corporate funds transferred to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. These were authorized by Adrian Sterling and disguised as server maintenance fees. Fees paid to servers that, as we have established, I own." "Lies," Adrian shrieked, lunging toward me, but 2 security guards held him back, unsure of what to do. "She is lying. It is a deep fake. The data is live. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, looking directly at the VIP section. You can check the public ledger right now. Orasys is built on stolen code, hosted on stolen servers, and run by a thief. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The massive stock ticker on the side wall, which had been green just moments ago, turned a violent red. The numbers began to freefall. The valuation dropped from $5 billion to under $1 billion in less than 60 seconds. It was a bloodbath. No. Stop it, Adrian begged, looking at the ticker. Please. Elena, stop it. I looked down at the front row. Victoria Sterling clutched her chest, her face turning an ashen gray, and collapsed sideways into the aisle. Isabel, realizing the cameras were turning toward her, covered her face with her purse and sprinted toward the emergency exit, pushing past a cameraman. Adrian stood alone on the stage, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Elena. Why, he whispered, the microphone catching his sob. We were partners. We were never partners. Adrian, I replied, dropping the microphone onto the floor. I was the architect. You were just the tenant. The feedback from the dropped mic screeched through the hall, signaling the end of the show. The police sirens were already wailing in the distance. The chaos in the hall was deafening, but inside my mind, everything was perfectly silent. Reporters were shouting questions, asking if I would negotiate, if I would sell the decryption key to save the company. I leaned into the microphone one last time. I am not selling, I declared, my voice echoing off the walls. The code belongs to me, and effective immediately. I am revoking the license. I pressed the final command on my phone. It was done. Across the globe, millions of devices running on Orasys software froze. From smart home systems to hospital logistics networks, screens turned black. The $5 billion empire did not just stumble, it vanished instantly, turning high-tech hardware into useless bricks of plastic and glass. The hum of the servers in the building died down, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Before the shock could fully register, the heavy double doors at the back of the room burst open. Officers from the Economic Crimes Unit marched in, led by a detective holding a warrant. They did not head for me. They walked straight to the stage. Adrian Sterling, you are under arrest for grand larceny, securities fraud, and corporate embezzlement, the detective announced, his voice cutting through the tension. We have the digital ledger provided by Ms. Vance. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The chief financial officer, who had been trying to sneak out the side exit, was tackled by two officers. Adrian stood paralyzed. He looked at the handcuffs clicking around his wrists. Then he looked up at me. His eyes were wide and wet, filled with a desperate, pathetic pleading that begged for mercy. Elena, help me, he choked out, his voice trembling. I am your husband. Please, don't let them do this. I looked at him, remembering the way he had looked at me in the coat closet just a few weeks ago. I remembered the coldness in his eyes when he threw the divorce papers at my chest. I remembered the rain. We are finished. Adrian, I said softly, repeating the exact words he had used to destroy me. I turned my back on him. I did not watch them drag him away. He was no longer my problem. He was just a glitch I had finally patched out of my system. My lawyer, Robert, was waiting by the stairs with a representative from Orasys's biggest competitor. The man looked eager, holding a document folder. The shell company the competitor asked. The brand. The building's all yours, I said, taking the pen. Everything except the code. The intellectual property comes with me. I signed the transfer agreement. The sale price was written clearly at the bottom, $1. I was not interested in their dirty money. I wanted the satisfaction of knowing Adrian's legacy was worth less than a cup of coffee. I walked out of the Gotham Hall, leaving the screaming investors and the flashing cameras behind. Outside, the sky had opened up again. A heavy rain was falling, drenching the city streets. But this time, I did not run for cover. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and let the water hit my face. It did not feel cold. It felt clean. It felt like baptism. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A notification from my new private bank account lit up the screen. Transfer received licensing fee. Amount $50 million. The new partnership deal I had signed with Robert's help for the use of my source code had just gone through. I stared at the number. It was enough to buy 10 penthouses. It was enough to disappear. It was enough to be free. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the platinum credit card. The plastic felt heavy with the weight of the past 8 years. It was the card that built an empire, the card that bought a mistress a diamond necklace, and the card that brought the whole kingdom crashing down. I walked over to a metal trash can on the corner. I did not break the card. I simply dropped it in amongst the coffee cups and old newspapers. It landed with a soft clatter. A yellow taxi pulled up to the curb, splashing a puddle onto the sidewalk. I opened the door and slid into the dry, warm leather seat. "Where to?" Lady the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. I leaned back and smiled. A genuine smile that reached my eyes for the first time in a long time. "The airport," I said, and then, everywhere else. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts. So please comment down below where you are listening from and what you would have done if you were in my shoes. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.